This brutal heel kick put Chance Rencountre in the hospital with 5 rib fractures and a collapsed lung. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and this is your #1 source for learning about the unique medical side of the world of sports. At Bellator 274, Andrey Koreshkov delivered this body kick that has to be one of the most vicious we've seen in the sport's history. You can see how his heel, or specifically the calcaneus, that's the bone of the heel, lands square flush on Chance Rencountre's right-sided chest, resulting in 5 rib fractures and a collapsed lung. Chance shared this update from the hospital where he described these injuries and actually showed his chest x-ray where we can see these rib fractures. So if we look here, this is of course the right side of his chest or his thorax. We catch a little bit of his vertebrae kind of here on the lower right portion of the screen. And then of course we can see his ribs kind of coming across in this direction. And with these rib fractures, we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 broken ribs from that single kick. This is insane. This is like major trauma on the level of what we might see with something like a car accident or somebody falling multiple stories out of a building. The other things that we can see on his x-ray here, we're catching a little bit of kind of the cardiac silhouette right up there in the top right. And he of course mentioned he had a collapsed lung or pneumothorax. We can actually see the border of the lung kind of right here. It's this little shady kind of fuzzy area just behind these kind of mid ribs. And if you look to this left part, you see how the texture right here is very kind of just solid black compared to right here, we see all this lung parenchyma. So this is actually the lung that's been sort of deflated or collapsed off of the outside portion of the chest wall. So if we had seen the upper part of his x-ray, we'd probably have seen a pretty significant portion of that lung shrunken down and collapsed from the increased air pressure inside his chest. Other important things to know on the x-ray here, of course, his liver is this structure that's sitting right here, kind of back behind those ribs, completely guarded. So one of the biggest things we worry about with this type of chest trauma is actually an injury to the liver, which can be more life-threatening with a major bleed to the liver than just the rib fractures of the collapsed lung alone. If the collapsed lung is big enough, they have to go in and actually put a chest tube from the outside of the skin into that space to basically remove the extra air that's built up inside the chest, causing the lung to collapse down. It's not like the lung pops and then collapses. Basically, extra air gets into that space around the lung that changes that negative pressure to where now there's positive pressure, and it's like the lung is actually being pushed inward. By putting in a chest tube, that allows that extra air to escape and restore that normal pressure so the lung can re-expand. Here in this picture, it doesn't look like he's got a chest tube in on that right side that we can see, so I don't know if that's something that they're planning to still do. One other thing we can point out here, these sort of wraps he has around his legs, those are to help prevent blood clots from forming in his legs. But great to see he looks like he's in good spirits. Mixed martial arts is this interesting balance of trying to be so precise and technically sound with your striking that you essentially cause your opponent to be no longer able to continue, but at the same time, you're not actually trying to like permanently maim somebody. But Koreshkov delivers this kick as technically sound in exactly the area that you would want to deliver it, to cause the most amount of potential damage here to injure or prevent a fighter from being able to continue. First off, the bottom of his heel is what makes flush contact with Chance's chest. The bottom of your heel is that hard heel bone called the calcaneus. That's that point where you're going to have the maximal amount of energy able to be transferred into the chest. The other thing he does is he sort of lands square underneath where the latissimus dorsi muscle is able to provide some degree of protection. So here, as Chance kind of rolls around, this contour that we're seeing, that shadow, is going to actually be the outline of his lat muscle. If Chance would have been turned a little bit more, if that kick would a little bit more kind of on the backside of Chance, there would have been more muscle there to help protect his ribs from sustaining a fracture. Thankfully for Chance, this kick was not a little bit lower. It looks like it catches him just high enough on the rib cage where it's not as much of a risk of causing significant liver damage. But with the amount of blow that this caused, fracturing 5 ribs, if that kick would have been a few inches lower right over the liver, this could have been a life-threatening situation for Chance if it had caused massive bleeding of the liver. Now, rib fractures typically don't require surgery unless there's specific circumstances. Management is actually more so about limiting pain because the more your ribs hurt when you try to breathe, the more impaired your breathing can be. That impaired breathing can lead to higher risk of things like pneumonia or respiratory failure, which is what's actually going to be potentially life-threatening as opposed to just the fractures themselves. Now, sometimes we develop something called a flail chest, where if you imagine here, this rib has just one portion broken, but if there's another fracture right there, that piece of rib can basically float away and is no longer attached to the chest wall. If you have sequential segments of ribs that have fractures in 2 locations, you get this flail chest. That can be something that's more often surgical than just standard rib fractures. But the majority of time with rib fractures, especially in a young, healthy person, we don't typically have to do surgery. There are circumstances where pain might not be able to be controlled. We're concerned about breathing function, and we do have to do a surgery. But if you were to pick, the majority of times, a rib fracture does not require surgery. I'm not sure the specifics of if Chance is going to or not for his specific case, because we also have to worry about other injuries and other factors here that affect overall prognosis, aside from just what we can see alone on his x-ray. Let me know below if you can think of any other body kicks that have caused this much trauma, because this is like next level motor vehicle accident, fall off a building types of chest injury that we saw from simply a big heel kick. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know, as always, any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.